Welcome back to Redacted Frequencies, the podcast that digs into the mysteries they don't want you thinking too hard about. I'm Cypher.
And I'm Echo. Today, we're diving into something that's been eating at me for years. The disappearance of Malaysia Airlines Flight 370.
Oh man, MH370, the one that just vanished.
Right? 239 people. Just gone. But here's the thing that's been bugging me. It's not that it disappeared. Planes crash, sadly. It's all the weird inconsistencies in what we were told about how they tracked it afterward.
Yeah, the official story has more holes than a crashed airplane, honestly.
Oof. Dark, but accurate. So today we're going through 5 major pieces of the puzzle that just don't add up. The satellite data that supposedly tracked the plane, the military radar timeline that keeps changing, the pilot theory that officials can't seem to get their story straight on,
The debris field that defies physics.
and the 2018 report that basically said, we have no idea what happened while contradicting everything they'd said before.
Before we start, though, let's be clear about what we're not doing here. We're not claiming aliens or secret government cover-ups or whatever. We're looking at the official evidence and asking, why does none of it make sense?
Exactly. Like when the people in charge of investigating keep changing their story, that's worth talking about. So let's start with the satellite data, because this is where it gets really weird. But before we get into the technical stuff, let's talk about the scale of this disappearance. This wasn't just any flight. This was a state-of-the-art Boeing 777-200ER, one of the most technologically advanced aircraft in the world. We're talking about a plane worth over $250 million, packed with tracking systems, communication equipment, and safety redundancies.
Oh, the Inmarsat handshakes. This is... Okay, so for people who don't know, there's this British company called Inmarsat that operates satellites for aircraft communications.
Right. And Boeing 777s don't just vanish. These aircraft have multiple independent communication systems, transponders, ACARS messaging, satellite communications. For all of them to go dark simultaneously while the plane keeps flying for hours, that's not a system failure. That's deliberate intervention.
Right, and their satellite was basically playing phone tag with MH370 every hour, even after all the other tracking systems went dark.
These handshakes, which, can we talk about how cute that term is for something so sinister?
Right? Hello, plane, are you still here? Yes, satellite, I'm still here, but I can't tell you where.
Exactly. So these handshakes were supposed to be automatic. The plane's equipment would ping the satellite every hour to stay connected to the network. What's weird is that after MH370 disappeared from radar, these handshakes kept happening for another 6 hours.
Which told them the plane was still flying somewhere for 6 more hours after it vanished. But here's where it gets sketchy. Inmarsat claimed they could figure out roughly where the plane went using something called Doppler shift analysis.
Okay, so Doppler shift is like, you know when an ambulance drives by and the siren changes pitch as it passes you?
Yeah, exactly. The idea is that if the plane is moving toward or away from the satellite, the frequency of the signal would shift slightly. And by analyzing these tiny frequency changes,
they could theoretically figure out the plane's path, which sounds brilliant, except
this had never been done before. Like, ever. Inmarsat basically invented this technique on the fly to analyze MH370's path.
And when independent experts asked to see the raw data to verify their analysis,
Inmarsat was like, nah, we're good, trust us.
I mean, they released some data, but not the complete raw logs. And here's what's really weird. there were supposed to be other types of automatic transmissions from the plane. Burst data transmissions and stuff that should have been recorded.
But those just weren't there. Or they were there, but the metadata was incomplete. It's like having a phone call recording, but missing half the conversation.
And when people started asking uncomfortable questions about the gaps in the data, Inmarsat's response was essentially, look, we're the satellite experts here. You wouldn't understand.
Which, fair enough if you're talking to random people on Twitter, but when PhD satellite engineers and aviation experts are asking to see your work?
Yeah, that's suspicious. And the thing is, this satellite data became the foundation for everything else. The search area, the theories about what happened, where the plane ended up. It was all based on Inmarsat's never-before-tested analysis of incomplete data that they wouldn't fully share.
And that brings us to the Malaysian military radar situation, which is, oh boy. And let's talk about what this satellite data actually led to, the most expensive search operation in aviation history. We're talking about $200 million spent scouring 120,000 square kilometers of ocean using everything from deep-sea submersibles to advanced sonar arrays.
This one makes me so angry. So MH370 took off from Kuala Lumpur at 12:41 a.m. on March 8th, heading for Beijing. Normal flight path, everything's fine. Ships from multiple countries, aircraft flying around the clock, underwater vehicles mapping the ocean floor, and they found absolutely nothing in the primary search area. Not a single piece of wreckage, not even a scrap of metal. For context, when Air France 447 crashed in the Atlantic, they found debris floating on the surface within days.
The last normal communication was at 1:19 a.m. Good night, Malaysian 370er. Classic last words that aren't supposed to be last words.
Right, and then the plane just vanished from civilian radar. But here's what we found out later. The Malaysian military was tracking an unidentified aircraft that appeared on their radar around the same time, flying back across the Malaysian peninsula.
An unidentified aircraft in their airspace after a commercial flight had just disappeared?
And they did nothing. No intercept, no investigation, no immediate alert. The Royal Malaysian Air Force basically shrugged and went back to sleep.
But wait, it gets worse. They didn't mention this radar data for days. Like, the whole world is searching the South China Sea for this missing plane, and Malaysia is sitting on radar evidence that it actually flew in the complete opposite direction.
Days! Can you imagine? Searchers are out there risking their lives looking in the wrong ocean, while Malaysia has data showing the plane went west, not east.
And when they finally did release this information, the timeline kept changing. First, they said they tracked it to 2:15 a.m., then it was 2:22 a.m., then some reports said 8:11 a.m.
It's like they were making it up as they went along. And here's what really gets me. Malaysia's air defense system is pretty sophisticated. They've got overlapping radar coverage specifically designed to detect unauthorized aircraft.
Right, this isn't some sleepy rural airport. This is a country that's invested heavily in air defense because of, regional security concerns.
So either their air defense system is completely useless, or they're not telling us everything they saw that night.
And that brings us to Captain Zahari Ahmed Shah, who, man, this guy became the fall guy for everything.
And this brings up something that really bothers me about this whole situation. The geopolitical implications that nobody wants to talk about openly. Malaysia is strategically positioned between major powers with complex relationships with China, the US, Australia. When a plane carrying mostly Chinese nationals disappears in this region, the pilot suicide theory, which, look, pilot suicide is a real thing that's happened before. Egypt Air 990, Germanwings 9525. It's tragic, but it's not unprecedented.
You're talking about intelligence sharing, military capabilities, territorial waters. There are layers here that go way beyond a simple aviation accident.
And when you have multiple countries' military radar systems tracking something, but they all tell slightly different stories about what they saw and when they saw it, but the way they built the case against Captain Shaw is just, it's so sloppy. Like, they found this flight simulation software on his home computer, which makes sense because he's, a pilot.
Right. Pilots use flight simulators. That's like saying a chef is suspicious because they have knives in their kitchen.
But then investigators claim they found a simulated flight path on his computer that was similar to the suspected route MH370 took into the southern Indian Ocean.
Smoking gun, right? Except the FBI analyzed the same computer and said the flight path wasn't a continuous simulation. It was just scattered data points that might have been from different sessions over months.
So basically, investigators took some random waypoints from a flight sim enthusiast's computer and connected the dots to make it look like premeditation.
And the Malaysian officials kept changing their story about this. First, they said it was definitely evidence of premeditation. Then they walked it back. Then they kind of implied it again.
It's like they couldn't decide whether they had evidence or not. And meanwhile, this guy's reputation is being destroyed posthumously.
Exactly. Captain Shaw was by all accounts an experienced, well-regarded pilot. No history of mental health issues, no financial problems, no obvious motive. But he became the convenient explanation when nothing else made sense.
And then there's the debris field, which is where the laws of physics apparently stopped applying. But let's step back from the pilot suicide theory for a moment and consider other possibilities that got less attention. What about the cargo? MH370 was carrying lithium batteries and other potentially hazardous materials. What about the passengers? There were experts in advanced technology aboard, including employees of companies working on military applications.
Oh God, the debris. Okay, so remember, this plane supposedly crashed in the southern Indian Ocean, right? Based on the Inmarsat data we talked about earlier. Right, and there's the whole question of electronic warfare capabilities. Modern aircraft can be vulnerable to sophisticated cyber attacks or electronic interference. If someone wanted to take control of an aircraft remotely or disable its communications while keeping it airborne, the technology exists. It's been demonstrated in controlled environments.
Right. And over the next couple of years, pieces of the plane started washing up on beaches across the western Indian Ocean, which initially seemed to support the theory.
The first piece was found on Reunion Island in July 2015, part of a wing called a flaperon. Then more pieces started showing up in Mauritius, South Africa, Tanzania, Madagascar.
Over 30 pieces total, I think? Which sounds like a lot until you realize we're talking about a Boeing 777. That's a massive aircraft. 30 pieces is like nothing.
Right, and here's where it gets weird. Multiple scientific studies tried to model how debris would drift from the supposed crash site to where these pieces were found.
Ocean drift analysis, basically following currents and wind patterns to trace where floating debris would end up.
And the models kept producing different results. Some studies said the debris patterns were consistent with the official crash site. Others said they weren't. Others said the debris should have shown up years earlier than it did.
And then there were questions about the condition of the debris itself. Some pieces looked like they'd been in the ocean for years, others looked fresher.
Yeah, and when independent experts asked to examine the debris more thoroughly or to see detailed forensic reports about the marine growth patterns and weathering,
those reports were never released, or they were heavily redacted. It's like everyone involved was allergic to transparency.
And speaking of allergic to transparency, the 2018 Australian Transport Safety Bureau report. This was supposed to be the definitive word on what happened to MH370.
And speaking of the debris forensics, there are some really specific details that raise red flags, like the flaperon found on Reunion Island. When French investigators examined it, they found barnacle growth patterns that didn't match what you'd expect from floating debris that had been in the ocean for 16 months. After 4 years of investigation and hundreds of millions of dollars spent searching, they were finally going to tell us what happened.
Marine biology doesn't lie. When something's been floating in tropical waters for over a year, you get specific types of marine growth, specific weathering patterns.
Some of the debris pieces showed growth that suggested they'd been submerged for different lengths of time or in different water conditions entirely. But these detailed forensic reports classified or simply never released.
Spoiler alert, they didn't. The report basically said, we still don't know what happened, but we're pretty sure the plane crashed at high speed into the ocean.
High-speed impact, no controlled landing, nobody survived. Case closed, move along.
Except multiple independent aviation experts looked at the same evidence and came to the opposite conclusion. They argued that the debris patterns and damage were more consistent with the controlled descent and attempted water landing,
which would suggest someone was still alive and controlling the aircraft at the end. Not exactly the mystery-solved conclusion the officials wanted.
And when these experts asked to see more detailed analysis of the satellite data that the conclusions were based on, sorry, that's classified or commercially sensitive or just ignored completely.
So we had the official investigators saying one thing, independent experts saying another, and nobody willing to show their work. It's like the worst group project ever.
And that's where we are today, 10 years later. We have families who still don't know what happened to their loved ones, an official story that's held together with duct tape and wishful thinking.
What really gets me is how this case changed aviation forever, but not necessarily in good ways. After MH370, the International Civil Aviation Organization implemented new tracking requirements. Aircraft have to report their position every 15 minutes over remote areas instead of every hour, but that's treating the symptom, not the disease. So what's our takeaway here? I mean, obviously something terrible happened to MH370, but the way the investigation was handled...
Exactly. We're making planes easier to track, but we're not addressing the fundamental questions about how someone could completely disable multiple communication systems simultaneously, or how military radar can track an unidentified aircraft for hours without taking any action. It's like putting a Band-Aid on a gunshot wound.
It's like everyone involved was more interested in closing the case than actually solving it. Delayed information, changing timelines, withheld data, contradictory official statements.
And through all of this, the changing stories, the withheld evidence, the premature case closure, there are families who have never stopped fighting for real answers. The MH370 families organized, hired their own investigators, conducted their own analysis. They've been more persistent than some governments in demanding transparency. And whenever independent experts asked uncomfortable questions, they were shut down or ignored, which is exactly what you'd expect if you were trying to hide something.
These families have spent their own money flying to different countries, meeting with officials, commissioning independent experts. They've uncovered inconsistencies and asked pointed questions that professional investigators somehow missed. And for their efforts, they've been told to accept the official story and move on. It's heartbreaking and infuriating. Now, are we saying there's definitely a cover-up? Not necessarily. Maybe it's just incompetence, or political considerations, or embarrassment about how badly the initial response was handled.
You know what makes this even more frustrating? When you compare MH370 to other major aviation mysteries, the level of transparency is completely different. Take the Lockerbie bombing. Yes, it took years to solve, but investigators shared evidence, published detailed reports, allowed independent analysis. Same with TWA 800. But the families of those 239 people deserve better than, trust us, we figured it out, but we can't show you how.
Even with Air France 447, which took 2 years to find the wreckage and longer to piece together what happened, the investigation was open, methodical, transparent. They published everything: the flight data recorder analysis, the human factors study, the technical failures. You could follow their reasoning step by step. With MH370, we got conclusions without seeing the work. And the aviation industry deserves to know what actually happened so it doesn't happen again. Because right now, we're just hoping that whatever caused MH370 to disappear was a one-time thing.
And here's what really worries me about the precedent this sets. We live in an era where commercial aviation is more important than ever. Millions of flights every year carrying billions of passengers. If a Boeing 777 can just vanish without a satisfactory explanation, what does that say about our ability to protect air travel? Which brings us to you, our listeners. What do you think? Are we missing something obvious? Have you come across information that we haven't covered?
Right. And it's not just about safety, it's about accountability. When governments and corporations can point to an unsolved mystery and say, case closed, nothing to see here, that's a dangerous precedent. It tells anyone planning something similar that as long as you're sophisticated enough, you might get away with it because the investigation will be too politically complicated to pursue properly. Hit us up on social media or send us an email. We love getting into these rabbit holes with you, and sometimes our listeners catch things we miss.
And if you enjoyed this episode, please share it. Stories like MH370 get memory hold pretty quickly, but the questions they raise about transparency and accountability don't go away.
Next week, we're diving into another solved mystery that maybe isn't as solved as we've been told. I'm Cypher.
Actually, before we wrap up, there's one more angle I want to explore that doesn't get talked about enough: the economic impact and the insurance implications. MH370 wasn't just a tragedy, it was a $200 million aircraft that vanished along with its cargo and passengers. The insurance payouts alone were massive. I'm Echo. Thanks for listening to Redacted Frequencies. And remember,
Right. And insurance companies don't just write checks without asking hard questions. They have their own investigators, their own experts, and they're motivated by pure financial interest to get to the truth. If there were obvious holes in the official story, you'd expect insurance fraud investigators to be all over this. The fact that the insurance payouts happened relatively smoothly is interesting. Sometimes the most important questions are the ones they don't want you to ask.
And there's another disturbing aspect: how this case exposed vulnerabilities in our global aviation tracking system that we're still not adequately addressing. MH370 showed that modern aircraft can essentially become invisible to civilian radar, and that military tracking systems in different countries don't necessarily communicate with each other effectively.
Think about it. In 2014, we supposedly had this sophisticated global air traffic management system, satellite tracking, international cooperation protocols, and yet a massive commercial aircraft disappeared for hours while multiple countries' military forces watched parts of its flight path and did nothing. If this was a test of our aviation security, we failed spectacularly.
and let's be honest about what this did to public confidence in air travel. Yes, flying is still statistically the safest form of travel, but MH370 introduced a new kind of fear, not just of mechanical failure or pilot error, but of the unknown. When authorities can't even explain how a plane disappeared, how can they assure us it won't happen again?
Exactly. Before MH370, when people worried about flying, they worried about specific understandable things: weather, mechanical problems, human error. Now there's this underlying anxiety about forces we can't see or understand. It's the difference between being afraid of a shark attack and being afraid of the ocean itself.
And we can't ignore how this case became a masterclass in information control. Remember those early weeks? The 24-hour news cycle was desperate for updates. So we got a constant stream of conflicting reports, leaked information, and official denials. By the time the dust settled, the public was so overwhelmed with contradictory information that many people just accepted whatever official conclusion was offered.
It's like the old saying, if you can't blind them with brilliance, baffle them with bullshit. Except in this case, it worked. Most people today, if you ask them about MH370, they would say something like, oh yeah, that was the pilot suicide thing, right? They've internalized the simplest explanation because it's easier than grappling with all the inconsistencies.
So where do we go from here? What would actual resolution look like? For the families, it starts with transparency, releasing all the radar data, the complete satellite logs, the forensic analysis of the debris. For the aviation industry, it means implementing real security measures, not just tracking improvements that treat the symptoms.
And for all of us, it means not accepting "trust us" as an answer when 239 lives are at stake. It means demanding that when governments and corporations claim to have solved a mystery, they show their work. Because the precedent set by MH370, that you can close a case by declaring it closed regardless of the evidence, that's bigger than just one missing plane. That's about accountability in an age where information is power.
You know, MH370 represents something unique in the modern era, a genuine mystery that can't be explained away by technology or solved by crowdsourcing or satellite imagery. In our hyper-connected world where everything is tracked, recorded, and analyzed, the idea that something this significant could just disappear feels almost impossible.
And maybe that's why this case continues to fascinate people 10 years later.
It reminds us that despite all our technology, all our systems and protocols, there are still things we don't understand. The difference is whether we admit that and keep investigating, or whether we pretend we have answers when we don't. MH370 is what happens when we choose the latter.
One last thing before we sign off, and this might be the most important point of all. 10 years later, we're not just talking about a missing plane anymore. We're talking about a template for how information can be controlled, how investigations can be shaped by political considerations, and how the public can be convinced to accept incomplete answers to critical questions.
Exactly. MH370 became a case study in manufactured closure, the art of ending a story before it's actually finished. And if we let that become the standard, if we accept that some mysteries are just too complicated or too sensitive to solve properly, then we're basically giving up on the idea that truth matters more than convenience.
So keep asking questions, keep demanding evidence, and don't let anyone tell you that some things are just too complex for you to understand. Because the moment we stop asking, show us how you know that, that's the moment we lose the accountability that democracy requires. The families of MH370 understand this. We should too.
Speaking of questions, next week we're diving into something even darker. Why so many whistleblowers suddenly disappear? From corporate to military, we're looking at the pattern of how those who speak up vanish quietly. It's a rabbit hole that connects more dots than you might expect.
Oh, that's going to be intense. And speaking of speaking up, if this episode got you thinking, we'd really appreciate it if you could hit that subscribe button and give us a like. It actually helps more people find these conversations.
Right, and seriously, drop a comment. Tell us what you think about the MH370 case or share any details we might have missed. Sometimes our best insights come from listeners who notice things we overlooked.
And if you're listening on podcast platforms, leaving a review helps other people discover the show. We know it takes like 30 seconds of your life, but it makes a huge difference for us.
You can also find us on social media. We share updates, bonus content, and sometimes get into discussions about episodes in our comments. Plus, it's fun to see what stories you want us to investigate next.
Until next week, keep questioning everything. I'm Echo.
And I'm Cypher. Thanks for listening to Redacted Frequencies. And remember,
sometimes the most important questions are the ones they don't want you to ask.